everyone. We're here today for another episode of Biblical Contradictions, and this week we're going to be discussing Genesis 7 and Genesis 8. And this is the story of Noah and the flood, and people often take three issues with this story. Firstly, is it 7 pairs of clean animals or 1 pair of clean animals that get onto the ark? Does everybody get onto the ark and wait for 7 days, or does everybody get onto the ark and the flood happens immediately? And finally, is it 40 days and nights of rain, followed by 150 days, or is it 40 days and 40 nights of rain with 150 days, and then there's another 150 days of flood afterwards? How does the timing work? The timing seems to be in contradiction with itself here. So, to answer these questions, we need to understand 2 things. Firstly, recapitulation. We discussed this in the previous episode when we discussed Genesis 1 and 2. Recapitulation is the idea of going over a piece of text again, or summarizing that piece of text again, but from a different perspective, maybe repurposing it, maybe highlighting something new. That's going to be really important for this discussion today, but also the Hebrew poem, or the poetic structure that is used here, is called a chiasm. Chiasm is very different to how we in the Western world write an essay, let's say. So in the Western world, when we write an essay, we'll do point 1, point 2, point 3, and then we'll make our concluding remarks, bring everything together, and this is the most important point of the essay, really, is the conclusion. In the Hebrew chiasm, this poem, this literary structure, they put the conclusion essentially in the middle. So you'll have point 1, point 2, point 3, leading up to the most important point. And this is the pivot point or the hinge point. And then from this point onwards, we have recapitulation of point 3, point 2, point 1. And it's this sort of pyramid structure or this mountaintop structure here. And that's going to be really important for tackling this passage here. So let's get into it. So I'm not going to read chapter 7 and 8. There's a lot of text here. I'm going to pick out pieces here. So we can see here in chapter 7, 1 to 5, God is talking to Noah and he's giving his general instruction for what is about to take place. He needs to take 7 pairs of clean animals, a pair of non-clean animals, birds, and then 40 days and 40 nights, there's going to be rain. And Noah did as the Lord commanded. So that's the first sort of structure. That's the first phrase, if you like. Second phrase then, 6 to 10, talks about how Noah was 600 years old when the flood came over the earth, and his whole family went to escape the flood, and the clean animals went in 2 by 2. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came on the earth. So this is phrase 2, and this is sort of a recapitulation of the first bit. This is a carrying out of those instructions that God has given in the first section here. But this is where we get the first contradiction. Well, it's this 2 by 2, male and female went onto the ark. So is it 2 by 2, or is it 7 pairs of clean animals and a pair of non-clean animals? Well, I think unfortunately this contradiction is just answered very plainly by the fact that they went into the ark in pairs. And if they need to go in pairs to be male and its mate, it makes sense that you're going to put them in pairs so that you can easily make sure that you've got the right amount. It doesn't say here that only a pair of clean animals went on. It just says that they went 2 by 2. So I think, unfortunately, the very first contradiction is very simply explained in that way there. But we do enter into this problem here where it says, after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. So they get into the ark and then they wait for 7 days. And that seems to be in line with the first phrase. In the third phrase then, from verses 11 through to 16, it says that the fountains of the earth burst forth and the windows of heaven were opened. Rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. And on the very same day, Noah and his family went onto the ark. And again, it says the animals went in pairs. And so we know the animals are going into the ark in pairs, not saying that there are only a pair of clean animals. So that's the first one. But this says on the day of the flood, that's when Noah and his family went onto the ark. So how do we understand this? Well, again, this is a recapitulation. So we've got these 3 phrases or 3 sections, and they're saying the same thing, but they're pointing to different things. So the first section is the God's instruction to Noah. The second section then is the high-level overview of what happens. The third section, which is this bit here, is actually what happened. And if we think about this logistically, you've got thousands of animals getting, and you're going to try and get them into an ark. How are you going to do that in 20 minutes time? You're not. So you are going to go into the ark immediately when God says, in 7 days' time, I will bring floodwaters on the earth. So you are going into the ark now, getting the animals into the ark. And it takes you 7 days to get the animals, all of the animals, into the ark. And then this is where this bit picks up, that they close the door on day 7, the floodwaters are opened, and the rain begins. And so actually, again, when we're understanding that there's a recapitulation here, it's not telling 3 separate stories, it's telling the same story from different perspectives to highlight different things. Hopefully this goes to show that there isn't a contradiction with the timing of events. It's simply, there are 7 days from when God speaks to when the flood occurs. And in those 7 days, Noah is getting all the animals onto the ark, and there are thousands of them. It's not going to be done in 20 minutes or so. So that's that. Let's move on then to the final contradiction here. And this is probably the hardest one. And I'm going to try and rattle through this quite quickly. I'll leave it maybe for another video to go into more detail on the actual numbers themselves. But again, I think in our Western way of thinking, we over-literalize the numbers and we maybe lose the significance of what the numbers represent. I do think you can make a case that the numbers work perfectly. That's not what we're talking about here, though. We are just talking about, is it 40 days and 150 days and then another 150 days? How does this all work? Well, if we think back to what I mentioned at the beginning, the chiasm structure, the pyramid or the mountain structure, we have the 7 days of waiting with Noah and his family. Then we have Noah entering the ark, and then we have 40 days of rain. And then it says in verse 24, and the waters prevailed on the earth for 150 days. So this is the climax almost then of what's happening in this narrative here. You've got 40 days of rain, and then you have 150 days in total of the flood. Chapter 8, verse 1, this is the pivot point. This is the most important point, the chiasm, as you see, the hinge point, and everything then is recapitulated as we go down this mountaintop. So, but God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark, and God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. And then verses 2 and 3 go on to say that the waters subsided to the point where on day 150, the ark came to rest on the Mount Ararat. So what's happening here is the rain falls for 40 days and 40 nights, and then God remembered Noah and his family. And so he caused the rain to stop and the fountains to close, and he caused a wind to blow over the earth. Now, at the end of chapter 7, it seems like the floodwaters is still growing, which is entirely possible as the water is flowing, as the floodgates have been let loose. Even if God has stopped them, they might be still rising, but ultimately the words that are used here in Hebrew are prevailing, that the flood is tremendous, it's everywhere, and it's prevailing, it's not subsiding. God remembers, and at some point then, after the 40 days and before the 150 days, this is where the water starts to recede. And we pick up this then in chapter 8, verses 2, 3, and 4. So the waters are receding, and that happens sometime between the rain stopping and day 150, which is when they really have receded to the point where the ark then comes to rest on the mountain. Now, there's some period of time here. There's about 74 days or so of the ark resting on the mountaintop. And when Noah sees the other mountain tops start to appear, at this point, he then opens his window, and this is the start of a 40-day period. And again, we can see this is a recapitulation of the initial 40 days of rain, day and night. Noah then sends out a raven. We don't know how long passes. It doesn't say that it comes back. And then he sends out a dove. Now, the dove doesn't find it anywhere to land, doesn't find anything fresh. And so Noah waits for 7 days. He then sends it out again. It brings back an olive leaf. He then waits again 7 days and sends it out again. And finally, it doesn't come back. Noah then waits some more time and then finally disembarks with his family. And so, again, even in that structure, hopefully you can see there are periods of 7 that are waiting, that are recapitulations of the times where in chapter 7 it mentions there are 7 days before the flood is going to occur. And finally, we end with Noah and his family and Noah and his family. So the end of chapter 8, Noah and his family have been let out of the ark and they're together. And that's how we start. So when we look at the scripture in this way of the Hebrew form of the chiasm, the contradictions seem to fade away. It's not in contradiction with itself. There aren't multiple 150 days. It's telling the same story, but one is the ascension to the highest point of the whole thing, which is, and God remembered Noah. That is the key point that the author wants you to be left with, for you to take away. And again, we lose this in our English because we read things linearly, and that sometimes can cause a bit of an issue. So yeah, I'll leave it there for today, but hopefully that's helped. And if you've ever been confused by this passage, hopefully this has cleared up some of that confusion. Hopefully catch you in the next one.